Of all the things that unite Americans, nothing compares to sports. Sports are how we mark the changing of the seasons. Sports draw us to the sounds of rubber on the court in the spring, the greenest fields you've ever seen in the summer, the crisp fall days of tailgates and college chants, the cold snow games of winter where you can't feel your toes, but you won't sit down. It is a connection to the past and the future. Generations of fans from all backgrounds, all walks of life, who find themselves together to share in sorrow or glory as the day decides. Sports is our great teacher, offering us lessons that guide us from a young age for the rest of our lives. Lessons about courage and grit, the importance of teamwork and diligence, how to play like a champion even in a loss. Sports has been at the center of American understanding about race, immigration, religion, and meritocracy. The baseball playoffs begin tonight, and from Jackie Robinson to Sandy Koufax to Roberto Clemente, our children learned what it means to be a good American from watching these larger-than-life figures give their all in the field of play. So why is it that sports today seems to be a place of division, not unity? Something used to break us further apart, not bring us together. When did competition become such a bad thing? 20 years ago, after 9/11, getting back to sports was incredibly important. It wasn't just a sign that America was going to continue. It was a sign that we were confident and unafraid. 8 years ago, tears turned to cheers and roars when David Ortiz told those cowardly marathon terrorists just whose city Boston was. The same motivation exists today. As we were first coming back from lockdowns, we all joined the crowds of fans whose proud voices carried our national anthem. But this creates an extreme division between what we are told and what we see on the screen. You probably heard on Sunday Dr. Anthony Fauci talking about whether we can have Christmas gatherings or not. Well, he did that on CBS. Between this and this. As much as media fearmongers decry these college and pro football games as superspreader events, the evidence shows they don't have a leg to stand on. In recent weeks, the use of sports to divide us has moved to individual players and their personal beliefs about vaccination. NBA players like Jonathan Isaac and Draymond Green have mounted eloquent defenses on the right to make their own medical decisions, making it clear that, yes, they've thought this through, much to the frustration of the overwhelmingly leftist sports journalists who want them to go along with the narrative. And let's talk about those journalists, particularly ESPN. The worldwide leader has been a constant force for division in recent years, driving race and gender-focused narratives, lauding acts of leftist political protest, and even sidelining qualified reporters like Rachel Nichols in service of the woke agenda. Just today, the excellent and talented Sage Steele is facing enormous backlash for her comments on race, vaccine mandates, and more. Failed former ESPN host turned Colin Kaepernick biopic producer Jamel Hill called her a clown for expressing those views. ESPN says they embrace different points of view in a statement. But do they really? This would be a good test. Let's consider someone who ESPN has had on their programming for years, journalism professor Kevin Blackstone of Maryland. What are some of his views? Well, he's repeatedly called for boycotting Israel from all sports and even banning them from the Olympics as an apartheid state. He's called for pulling the All-Star game from Atlanta and denying future sports events to Georgia over their election integrity law. And he called for banning military flyovers and the playing of the national anthem, which he calls a war anthem, before games. He even complained about being forced to sit through it. That's a leftist academic whose opinion ESPN thinks you need to hear. That's not a problem, like when Sage Steele shares her opinions. She broke rule number 1. She talked, and she said something woke corporate didn't agree with. Americans are tired of this woke crap, particularly when it's filled with the underlying hypocrisy of kowtowing to the interests of China. By now, you know all about that story, how an American sports league with a corrupt relationship with shoemakers made in horrible overseas conditions had to engage in all manner of song and dance, pretending to look the other way because a GM had the audacity to send one tweet. LeBron James has lots of opinions, but China, what does he know about China? As author Ethan Strauss, longtime NBA reporter, writes, it could be argued that the NBA fixates more on China than on America, even if the vast majority of TV money comes from the U.S. viewership. The league figures it has more or less hit its ceiling in its home country, so China becomes an obsession as this massive theoretical growth engine. This isn't a question about Republicans or Democrats. At some point you have to ask, do they hate their customers for being American? Is what's really going on here wishful thinking desiring to dissolve that fan base that wants beer and trucks and action movies, and instead aspire for a fan base where the WNBA outsells Michael Jordan's newly toxic masculinity. As with so many other areas of American life, the institution of sports is being turned against the very people who go to the games and buy the tickets and cheer. It is driven both by globalist corporations who no longer think of themselves as innately American, and by a leftist-dominated media complex who despises the fans of the very games they cover. Closer to home, parents must worry about their daughters competing against their neighbors' sons because of intersectional madness masquerading as tolerance. Even proudly lesbian athletes like tennis champion Martina Navratilova have expressed concerns about the challenges posed by allowing trans girls to compete against biological girls. But despite all this, sports finds a way. There is still that human desire for the connection that brings us together as fans, despite all the efforts to divide us. My mom is a dedicated baseball fan. Here she is with her friends Scooter and Bobby. For years, they've sat together and shared stories and gripes and cheered on the Nationals throughout the season. They have strong opinions about everything in DC sports for the past 50 years. There is no reason that people from such different walks of life should end up as friends. But that's the power of sports. It brings us together in ways that surprise us. It gives us ideals to strive for. And even as the left has sought to corrupt sports with their woke agenda, their mission is ultimately doomed. They view sports as a tool to use against the people, when we know it binds us together as citizens and friends. Dr. Fauci can't stand in front of 100,000 joyous, screaming Penn State fans. I'd like to see him try. I'm Ben Domenech, and this is The American Crisis.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.